The Mets did not finish where a lot of people thought they were going to in 2023. But are they doing some really smart things for 2024 and beyond? Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets is here for a crossover episode of Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and thank you to veterans all across this country. And welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I'm an Emmy-nominated television producer who's been a baseball podcaster for over a decade. I've just finished 5 full seasons here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. And follow us on, you can follow me at Sully Baseball on Twitter or whatever it's called now, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, or subscribe to here on YouTube. If you follow us every day, please post the banner every day, Sully, so I know who is listening to us every single day. And this episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. Empower yourself. When you purchase a Jase case, providing with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics and at least for 50 or more infections, get yours today at Jase Medical. That's JASE medical.com. As I mentioned before, this is not a solo episode. No way, no how, no McCoy. We're bringing in the big guns. It must be sweeps weeks because the ratings come in big when Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets is here. How you doing, buddy?
Doing great. It's off season, so it's the best time for Mets baseball at this point.
I really thought at the beginning of the year you'd be a frequent guest in October as we see where the Mets were going. And if you had told me that an 84-win wild card team was going to stagger into the World Series, I was like, oh, man, must be a good time to be a Met fan. But no. Look at, there's a bunch of things we're going to cover in today's episode. But I am going to go over, well, before we do that, the trivia question, which was there have been many instances where future Hall of Famers were traded for each other. When was the last time there was a trade where one future Hall of Famer was traded for another future Hall of Famer? And these are for people who are currently enshrined in the Hall of Fame. And mind you, these were not Hall of Famers at the end of their career. These were still all-stars in their prime with their best years ahead of them. Ryan Finkelstein, do you know what trade that was? The last one that was made?
See, I know one that could be one day if Gary Sheffield ever got in the Hall of Fame, like Gary Sheffield and Mike Piazza. But
yeah, and I think he should be. But that's not the case.
That's not the case. I do not know. I don't have a good guess.
It was the stunning trade that sent Joe Carter, not a Hall of Famer, and Roberto Alomar, Hall of Famer, in exchange for Tony Fernandez, not a Hall of Famer, and Fred McGriff. So Fred McGriff and Roberto Alomar were in that shocking deal between San Diego and Toronto just after the 1990 season that really shaped the Blue Jays and sort of pushed them over the top. So someone did get that correct actually. It was who got that one right? Was it Susan Townsend and John Murphy Jr.? I believe it was. Okay, good job getting that trivia question right. I have a Mets-centric trivia question to go at the end of the podcast today. And Ryan, if you know the answer, don't blurt it out. I'm trying to get
Right.
people to my everyday Sullys tend to do that. So Ryan, I actually have a lot of positive thoughts about the Mets. Which is strange because this was a year where a lot of people thought they were going to go far and they didn't. But before I cannonball into that, let's do the autopsy here. What was your thoughts? Let's do our final thoughts before we Men in Black this season out of Met fans' heads. By the way, Men in Black, a film that featured a UFO flying over a Mets game. Bernard Gilkey, I think, was the outfielder whose ball ricochets off his head. Okay, it's either Bernard Gilkey or Ray Langford. Anyway, what were your thoughts of what happened, and at what point did you just say, "Oh boy, this is it's not going to be this year"?
There was a large portion of the first half of the season where I kept on trying to talk myself into, okay, well, this is a Mets team that if they could, the wild card race allows you with the three teams to feel like you always can really get back into it, right? And look, if there were only a couple games over 500, as you mentioned, they would have been in it. So the first half, I knew when Justin Verlander came back and the Mets were playing a series against the Tigers and they got swept. That was the first time when the alarm bells really rung in my head. But it wasn't until the disastrous June that I really came to terms with, this probably isn't going to go anywhere. And even then, I don't think it was until they actually traded David Robertson where I knew for sure that was the direction they're going. I will say that while the season was extremely disappointing, I am so happy that the Mets were one of the few teams that sort of saw the writing on the wall and did something about it, because that's going to lead into your overarching points, right? So that's we'll leave it there as far as where the season went, but I think that they turned this into a positive with how they handled it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to really cannonball into that for a second, because I not only think that they are. I'm teasing something in our second segment here. Not only do I think they did the smart thing, I think they made a philosophically seismic decision that I think will pay off in an unbelievable way. But that's my tease for segment 2. But I will say I do the summer score during the regular season where I keep track of which teams, and we wake up every morning which teams are playoff teams, and I have a scoring system, and it starts on Memorial Day, because I think you can't look at the standings before Memorial Day. I mean, it's ridiculous. Hey, we're in first place. It's our taxes aren't due yet. Okay, just calm down. You won a series against the Tigers. Calm down. But Met fans woke up on Memorial Day and they were a playoff team. As recently, as late as June 3rd, a Met fan could wake up and say, "How are the Mets?" Well, they're one of the wild card teams. And that's amazing when you think about the trade deadline was the end of July, but on June 3rd, Met fans woke up and go, "Oh, well, at least we're going to the playoffs this year," which again just shows you what a catastrophe June was, not just for the Mets, but also for the Pittsburgh Pirates, who also were a playoff team when they woke up right around then. So, it really just unraveled big time after that. And it always seemed, yes, the injuries were devastating, but it just seemed like you were watching a dubbed Godzilla film. Something wasn't in sync. Something didn't quite, I would be watching Met games because I like the Mets. I do. And I wanted them to succeed. And I kept looking and going, why isn't this working? You ever see a movie where you're like, the cast is great and the talent is great and all the production values are great, and yet it doesn't work? It's like, yeah, why isn't this working for me? And that was, watching this Mets team was like watching the last Indiana Jones film. It's like everyone involved in this is talented, maybe a little too old, but something's not working on this, and it feels very dissatisfying. Was it just, coming off a 100-win season, was it just things weren't clicking? Was it age catching them? What was missing in this year?
The crazy thing is, if you actually look at the offseason moves they made, they all worked. Like Kodai Senga, a brilliant signing. Jose Quintana, he was hurt, so that was a big factor. But when they got him back, he was
terrific.
Yeah, he was amazing. So, Brooks Raley, they traded for him. He was good. So the offseason's move worked. It was the moves from the year prior that didn't. Like Starling Marte had a horrible season. Jeff McNeil goes from batting champ to a guy that really struggled, and he kind of salvaged his numbers in the second half when the games didn't matter. But he had those were the two guys in the starting lineup. And then the pitching just, David Peterson looked like a up-and-coming starter in 2022, and he was the worst starting pitcher in baseball before he eventually got demoted. He was another guy that in the second half sort of improved the numbers a bit, but was so bad in those crucial games at the beginning of the season. And Max Scherzer really kind of killed them. I mean, every time, the stats, I think his ERA was just over 4. But he gave up so many home runs. It just cost them in so many games. There was the suspension for the sticky stuff. There was which is a whole story for another day. It's not worth even spending time on it. There was a couple of lingering injuries. That rotation just never quite got right. And it constantly put the bullpen in a bad position. But like you said, it really comes down to sometimes you watch your baseball team and you just know it's not their year. And then that's what it was. It was just a team that could not pull off any serious victories. And you just kept on. And I think they had 2 5-game winning streaks all year. So they just never put together a good run of baseball. And you just hope it doesn't carry over because there isn't a concrete reason for why it all happened.
Well, look, in the segment 2, we're going to talk about some of the things that they did that I think is not only smart, but potentially brilliant. But you're talking about health.
Yes.
And speaking about health,
today's episode is brought to you by Jase Medical. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world today. It's important to be prepared. Supply chain shortages for medications or an inability to get medications in a timely manner due to natural disasters, or if you're traveling abroad, all these things can leave you unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected, and that's why Jase Medical provides their Jase case, 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Jase handles everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Jase was doctor created and is doctor recommended. You can now customize your Jase case with dozens of add-on medications. You can even add additional medications based on your unique needs. Go to Jase Medical and enter the code LOCKEDON at checkout for a $20 discount on your order. That's promo code LOCKEDON at Jase Medical, JASE medical.com.
all right. At one point, the Mets pulled the ripcord, and they saw it was a seller's market. Now, I have up here, I have the MLB Mets top prospects up to date. The top 2 prospects they have listed right now on MLB.com/prospects are Luis Angel Acuna and Drew Gilbert. 2 players who were acquired at the trade deadline. They essentially got their 2 top prospects as listed right now because they said, to heck with it. Let's sell. There were a ton of high profile, sexy managers that were available. They went for Mendoza. They let Showalter go, and Showalter will find another place. I think he's actually going to go to Milwaukee, but who do I know? But they brought in a young manager, and they brought in young players. And they are, the new management came in. They pushed all the chips to the center of the table. They tried to pull a 2004 Red Sox to say, let's just buy a title. And this is coming from a Red Sox fan. 2004 was bought, and thank you very much. It was on our wish list. But they pushed all the chips to the center table. So we got to win right away and get this proverbial monkey off of our back. And it didn't work. And instead of throwing more money, bad money after good, they said, let's rebuild. Let's build forward. And I think that was not only brilliant for the short term, but I think it's nonsense, this notion that you can't rebuild in New York, because how's that working out for everyone? New York fans won't accept anything less than a championship. Unless your top team is the MLS team, whose name I couldn't tell you for $100,000 right now, I have a feeling not a lot of New Yorkers' top team is the MLS team, then it's been over a decade since any team in New York has won a title. And so the Mets, I think, are saying, all right, then let's build one, even if it is from the ground up, and create a team that is filled with players that the fans can embrace and eventually be a championship caliber team. Am I crazy for thinking that?
Not at all. And, when it all went down, I had an episode, pretty much right after the deadline where I said, Steve Cohen just bought a rebuild, and that's what they did. And they looked at the situation with Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer, and those guys, like you said, they were bought to win a championship. And when you have as bad of a first half of this season as the Mets did, you're sitting at the deadline knowing that the chances of you making a run are slim to none. You're looking at a window with Max Scherzer of 2 years and Verlander, maybe 3 years, where one of those potential years to win a World Series is out the window. So all that money that they were owed was just dead money for this year. And then you're thinking, okay, we're going to run this same team back. Are we really going to win in 2024? And when you really come to terms with the fact that the likelihood of winning a World Series was so slim, they ate a ton of money. All of it was dead money for this season. They ate all the contract for the Rangers and the Astros, all of it for this season. And then not only did they eat some money to get those prospects next year, but they also freed up about $45 million that they can now reinvest in their rotation to still, have a team. I don't think they're going to go and be as out front as they were this past season or the year before. But what they're going to do is they're going to build a competent roster. And if their young talent arrives early, which we saw so many teams in baseball this year where young talent did arrive early.
Arizona,
yeah, exactly. Texas to a certain respect. Like there's a lot of teams. Baltimore. I mean, the Mets have a wave that just debuted, and Francisco Alvarez was the one that had a really good season, but there's still Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Ronnie Mauricio, who, came up as top prospects and will try to do better in year 2. And then they have the guys that they just acquired who they didn't acquire 18-year-olds. These are guys who are starring in AA in Acuna and Gilbert. So they might not be up this season, but 2025, you have a core that's really forming. So it was really smart what they did. And then to get David Stearns, to me, I am so happy with the outcome of the season to get what they got at the deadline. And then for David Stearns to be the president, I feel so comfortable with where the Mets are as a franchise, the farm system at its current state, and the guy that's making decisions now, that I don't even think that this is a lengthy rebuild. I mean, I think they might not win this year, but 2025, I believe they'll be World Series contenders again.
I certainly think I certainly think there'll be a legitimate playoff team in 2025. Absolutely. Yeah. And if you look, I mean, again, I've made this point before. I talk about the rule of 7 all the time, that if you don't start following sports, they're around 7 years old. And I'm not going to count the MLS team, because any league where the top player would jump ship to another league in a heartbeat is not a major league. I'm sorry. So the most recent New York championship, that includes NBA, WNBA, NHL, the NFL, Major League Baseball. The most recent one was 2012. Okay? 2012, the Giants. All right? And before that, it's the Yankees. And then you got to go way back if you want. It's a Devils title, or, if you're a Met fan, which I believe you are.
Yeah.
It's 86. If you're an Islander fan, if you're a Knicks or Jet fan, you need a hug. I'm 51 years old, and they haven't won in my lifetime. So these are the types of, I guess the Knicks won when I was a baby, but I was too young, rule of 7. So if you say something, hey, it's going to take a couple more years, but it won't be, first of all, I think any Met title, any one of those teams winning a title, even a completely bought one, would be loved because they're so hungry for a championship. But if it could be a team filled with young players that Met fans can get really attached to, I think that would be, there's so many like bandwagon fans in New York that suddenly the Mets would be whichever one of those teams, this is the point I'm making, any one of those teams, Mets, Jets, Giants, Knicks, Yankees, whatever team it is, the next one to win a title would be the first one for an entire generation. Yeah. New York has never seen a drought like that going back to the days of John McGraw. There's not been a drought like this. An entire generation has been born, raised, and applied to City College and has never seen a parade. So the next one to win will be the one that's beloved. And so the Mets are thinking, why not us? Yeah. And why not get the guy who made a consistent playoff team in Milwaukee and have him do that here, and we'll resign him.
And I'll tell you too, watching everything from David Stearns so far, every time he speaks to the media, it's amazing to see someone who has his resume, who is absolutely living out his dream job, grew up a Mets fan. They are owned by a Mets fan and now run by a Mets fan who want this as bad as the entire fan base. And you just hope that all of that can coincide where this team can't get over that mountaintop. But even just to me, to see them consistently be in the mix and to not have a season like the one the Mets fans just had to endure, that's really where I hope they get to. And the championship will just be, like you said, unbelievable if they can pull that off in the not too distant future. But just give me a consistent winner at this point. I'd be pretty happy.
We're doing a Locked On MLB, Locked On Mets crossover here. Showalter's gone. Everyone and their cow thought it was going to be Counsell coming over. Instead, Counsell goes to the Cubbies, who I think have a shot of winning faster than the Mets do. I think the Cubs are going to be a contender. Hell, they were a contender this year. They finished barely behind Arizona. But I was stunned that it was not Counsell coming over there. But Mendoza is, look, I don't know enough about him. I've always been preaching the gospel of hire Bruce Bochy's lieutenants. Take a sip, everyone. Take a shot. I mentioned Bruce Bochy's lieutenants again. So that would have meant to me Hensley Mullins, who was in the Mets organization at one point. But hiring a young manager shows that they're also thinking the long term here as well. That we're going to put together something and see it ride. What do you know about him, and what are your thoughts about him as the new skipper?
You know, I think I've said it on my show. Like I couldn't. For me to sit here and say this is an amazing hire when I didn't know Carlos Mendoza's name 2 weeks ago is disingenuous. Like I can't say, oh, slam dunk. But what I will say is, while Craig Counsell was the ideal fit that everyone was talking about, from my understanding of the situation, the two most important things to Counsell was setting that bar on how much managers are getting paid, and was also staying close to home. So when he gets that Cubs opportunity, he wanted to be there. And if Craig Counsell had been the manager of the Mets if they had overpaid, let's just say they gave him $50 million instead of the Cubs 40, the pressure that would have put on Counsell and the team, I think would have been horrible. And it would have been a distraction in itself. This is a case where they get a manager who was not only the finalist for the Mets job, he was a finalist for the Padres job. There was multiple teams interviewing Mendoza. It seemed like he was going to get one of these opportunities. They said that the Brewers probably would have hired him if the Mets didn't. Everyone who's talking about him at the Yankees organization has said nothing but great things. And I think you're getting someone who did, kind of work up the ranks and has a player development background, which I think is perfect for a team that is going to have a young core of position players coming up that really need that guidance. So I think they did a really nice job here. We're not going to know if he's a good manager until he starts managing games. But I think considering all the circumstances, they got a really nice fit. The fact that he's worked in New York now for a while too, that's always a little bit of a benefit. So I think they did well here, and we'll just see how it works out coming into this season. If he's just the bridge guy while this core is getting developed, that's not the worst thing either.
No, I agree. And I think that I agree with everything you just said. I think that he is, for a team that's developing, you need a development manager and someone with their eye towards the future. And I think that's great. What about the Pete Alonso being traded rumors? Do you think that's going to happen?
Sully, I have had some pretty emotional podcasts about this one because I am very frustrated about the reporting around Pete Alonso because, for one, you just have to think about the Mets' plans next year. This is not a team that is going into the type of a rebuild where they're not going to try to put a competitive product out there. They're not going into this year trading Pete Alonso for prospects. And you're also not really going to get what you need in this roster that's going to make you any closer to winning. There's also a chance. I think the Mets are going to let Pete Alonso play this contract year out, probably. And I think that they'd still sign him in free agency. Nimmo came back after being a free agent. David Stearns he's all but said they aren't trading Pete Alonso, but there's a lot of people that want to make a story out of something because he's going to be a free agent after this season. They said they expect him to be the opening day first baseman. I'd be pretty shocked if he wasn't. The one time where Alonso could get traded is if this season goes as sideways as the last one did.
Right.
And you're sitting at the deadline and you really don't know if he's going to come back and you can get a haul for him at the deadline. Maybe. But in the offseason, I'd be pretty stunned if he got traded.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and I also think you need to have some stability. You need something to sell some season tickets,
Yeah.
especially since you're saying that we don't think they're going to be necessarily winners next year. Well, what do you think if they pull it off? Could they be the team for bandwagon fans to jump upon? I mean, having you know people can't shut up about 86 and I think everybody including the Bat Boy have written books about that. I've texted with my cousin Dave, who's a rabid Met fan, and I said I want the Mets to win a title if for no other reason than we don't have to hear about 86 ever again in our life. Man, they should have signed Ray Knight to a 10-year deal. But do you think what do you think is going to happen if this team explodes the way I think you and I think they can, and they could be the Brewers with a budget, uh, or even or Atlanta with a budget? What do you think? Do you think this city's going to be ready to go Met crazy?
Of course. I mean, we saw it even, 2022 when they had that season. When the Mets are good, the fans are going to be there in droves. And, even just the recent plans that have been announced about trying to build up the area around Citi Field, an $8 billion plan that Steve Cohen has been working tirelessly on to, put a Hard Rock out there and restaurants and bars and public parks. Like, I just think that if I end up having kids one day, they're going to get to grow up being with their experience as a Mets fan being completely different than the one that I had. At least that's my hope. Because I think that the best days for Mets baseball truly are coming with Steve Cohen being an owner that you just cannot possibly have any problems with if you're a fan. Someone who's investing this much in the team and cares this much, that's all you want from your owner. And I really think that it's going to net positive results. It might not be in 3 to 5 years, like he originally said, but it's going to happen.
All right, Ryan, I got tell people where they can listen to your wonderful show.
Wherever you get Locked On MLB, you can find Locked On Mets, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan, and find the show at Locked On Mets.
All right, let's talk our trivia question for today. The Mets have won 2 World Series titles, 1969 and 1986. And if anyone knows me, and I know I do, I have a fascination with the people who get the pitchers who get the final clinching out. What do the pitchers who clinched the 1969 World Series and the 1986 World Series have? What is the connection between those two pitchers? That's the way I should have phrased it. What is the connection between the pitcher who clinched the 1969 World Series and the pitcher who clinched the 1986 World Series? It means you may have to know who they are, but look it up or not. But either way, there is a direct connection between the two of them. Send those answers down here on the comment section, YouTube, or Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully, but Sully Baseball on Twitter, or whatever it's called now, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Talking about how glorious and positive it is to be a Met fan with Ryan Finkelstein of Locked On Mets. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On Mets crossover on Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your service, all those out there. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.